This film is about a semi-philosophical theory, some of which I heard briefly, and some extrapolated from that. The first chunk of this will be about 4 other possible numbers of conscious beings in the universe which I've come up with, although I find these numbers somewhat less convincing. The second chunk will be focused on the actual main infinite space ghost theory. Remember, all of this is pure pseudoscience fiction and not even slightly backed by evidence. Enjoy! The first of these is the most interesting, since we need to get the number of consciousnesses as low as possible. That would be 0, since there can't be negative consciousnesses if there wasn't the problem of you thinking and therefore being. So the lowest number is 1. Now you could either be the most likely option of a conscious being coming into existence for a split second with all of your fake memories and senses before disappearing just as quickly. If you are that, then thanks for using your 1 second watching this. Goodbye. Or have the much less likely option of all your senses having been faked and just randomly happening to line up your entire life. That's still probably more likely than the universe coming to be for real. Lovely. The next, and possibly the most commonly thought amount of consciousnesses in the universe, are all the creatures possessing a brain. It makes sense intuitively, and it also explains why we don't feel so bad about the paper industry cutting down millions of trees each year. And it also seems commonly thought that the bigger the brain is, generally, the more consciousness a thing possesses, which is why we don't feel bad about removing infestations of termites or ants. Although this is the most commonly seen way that consciousnesses work, I would argue that a bacteria or tree are just as alive as any other creature. Even if they don't have a consciousness exactly like ours, they still probably have one. Which leads me to the next part. Although they don't have brains, plants are the next addition to the total. I listened to the audio version of The Secret Life of Trees, which was part of the inspiration for this film. It's about the complex going-ons between trees that the author noticed. The whole time listening, I was wondering what the experience of life looks like to them. The book made it abundantly clear that they are conscious in some way, otherwise they would be no different to a robot running on water, light energy, and CO2 instead of oil. They'd be under the same classification as viruses, not quite alive nor dead. Perhaps their consciousness is more dreamlike or slow than ours, but if you believe your dog is conscious, then trees are too. The final amount of consciousnesses I've come up with, before the one, is many orders of magnitude more than the previous editions added. Microbes, or possibly microorganisms. This edition includes microscopic archaea, bacteria, and eukaryotes. Similar to the plants argument, if the thing is alive, it's probably conscious. I highly doubt the first life forms are separate from the first conscious beings. To be alive is to be conscious, and they are both. Although they probably aren't that conscious, as their lives require little thought, they still are somewhat so. Now, it's time to get on to the actual point. Infinite space ghost theory. Disclaimer, I haven't found an official name for a theory like this, but I'm sure it exists, so I'm not claiming to be the first one to come up with this at all. The basic premise starts with conceptualizing the consciousness as being everywhere, and coalescing into more complex shapes the more complex the vessel is. The brain got bigger and more complex because that allowed it to survive more, and the consciousness got bigger and more complex with the brain. Our brains are bigger and more complex than an ant's, and so we are more conscious. It's a positive correlation. If we are on the complex extreme of consciousness, then what about the other extreme? The simplest piece of matter a consciousness could theoretically take form as. A single hydrogen particle in space. Even a piece of space dust if that's too small. You might think it would be a torturous experience being in the form of an object. When I was younger, I had worried if household objects were secretly and immeasurably conscious and mute in a constant state of loneliness and boredom. You might imagine it like sitting in a black void, unable to sense anything for all of time. Luckily, this is almost certainly not the case. Since they don't have senses of much description, there's no reason to assume that they would have the capacity for emotion or memory, both functions of the brain. They can't feel emotions like loneliness or notice the change in time to be bored even if they could. They wouldn't even know that they existed at all. You could say that if consciousness requires some form of vessel, then there aren't infinite of them, so the name of infinite space ghost theory is misleading. True, if it required a vessel. Who's to say that an even simpler form of consciousness, if it could even be called that at this point, could be floating invisibly in nothingness? And although there aren't infinite particles, since things don't go smaller forever, there are infinite coordinates to take up. So there. Infinite space ghosts, unfeeling and questionably conscious at all? Beautiful. See ya.